So, hello everyone. I'm very glad to be here and to have the opportunity to talk with you. Maybe about me, I'm Alexandra Kertz-Welzel. I got an MA in music education and in piano performance and harpsichord performance. So I spent 10 years at Musikhochschule, we call it in German. Musikhochschulen in Saarbrücken near the French border. And then I went to Seattle. That's why I detected the American accent. To spend 4 years there on a postdoc with Patricia Sheehan Campbell. I don't know who knows her. She's very big in multicultural music education. And since 2011, I'm professor and chair of music education at Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität in Germany. We are 550 years old, and our hierarchies sometimes seem to be as old as that. I'm currently Vice Dean of the College of Arts and History, and this means I also know something about administration, about administrative processes. And I told Richie, when I started my job in 2011 at LMU, only 16% of all professors were female. And recent statistics showed that we have now all over Germany 27% of female professors. So there's still a lot to imagine about a different world, and especially at Academies of Music. What I'm going to talk about today, Utopian Thinking, is part of a book I published 2 years ago about rethinking music education and social change. I'm very interested in connections between music education and society, and how we can make the world a better place, while at the same time, given our history in Germany of the Third Reich and music educators who supported Hitler, we have to be very careful of not to overextend what music can do, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm only talking about the positive. And so for me, it's always important that we don't only criticize and say what's wrong, but that we try to build alternatives, that we try to figure out what we could do better. And I think that utopian thinking sounds a little bit crazy, is a little bit crazy, but at least in the way it is used in sociology, it can really be helpful for us. So and I hope you join me on this journey, and I try to make you into at least a little bit of utopian thinkers. That you try to reactivate the energy of utopian thinking, which kids and young people still have, but we tend to lose it, especially in Academies of Music, like in our group where we lose the fun of making music. That was, by the way, the reason why I studied harpsichord, because my piano professor got me pretty much out of the joy of music, because I needed to be perfect. But the harpsichord, you couldn't be perfect, because you know the small keys, so you play wrong notes anyway. So, and it didn't matter, by the way, at the times where these instruments were used. So, at all times, human beings dreamed of better worlds. There are stories such as the German Schlafland or the Irish land of cocaine. These stories exemplify a longing for a better way of being and living, for a certain kind of happiness. Depending on the situation, the dreams of better world look different. When there was war, a better world might be about peace and reconciliation. When there was starvation, an abundance of food might have been a worthwhile dream. When there were injustice and discrimination, a just society might have been the vision for a better life. In the 16th century, English philosopher and politician Thomas More coined a name for these visions of better worlds. He called them Utopia. Since then, there has been an interesting history of utopia and utopian thinking in philosophy, politics, and also sociology. Could you go to the next slide, please? Right. Brodsky and Erlboff might be right about the significance of utopian thinking. They wrote a book about feminist utopias, and this quote is from that book. Quote, caring for today and tomorrow intertwined, to live this future we must envision it first. Even as we strategize for the realities of today, we must picture where we are headed and summon the hope to continue working. Utopian thinking gives hope and direction. And it is an important tool in processes of transformation, no matter if they concern entire societies or respective institutions. In this sense, I would like to talk about utopian thinking as a catalyst for change in higher music education, to present utopian thinking as a valuable tool in your endeavor to transform and rebalance power relations in higher music education. Next slide, please. This is what I'm going to talk about. First, I would like to present some definitions and some ideas about what utopia is, then how to learn utopian thinking, the connection between utopia and politics, utopian thinking in higher music education, and then finally future perspectives. Next slide, please. I guessed that you were a group who likes to be engaged. And before I tell you what utopia and utopian thinking is, I would like you to practice it. So now, for 1 minute, I would like you to close your eyes and to think about your ideal life, which might concern your personal situation, it might concern the society in general, it might concern your workplace, higher music education, whatever. And then please talk to your neighbor, if you don't have one, you need to find one, about aspects which might be interesting for you and maybe you also would like to share afterwards. Okay, now let's start with this exercise. 1 minute, okay? 1 minute, close your eyes, imagine your ideal world. Now, please come back. Yes, you are here. No. All right. I saw some people smile. It was really interesting. So please talk to your neighbor briefly about some things you want to talk about. You don't need to reveal everything. Just a bit. Who wants to share some ideas? You don't have to, just all right, so I will ask later again when we walk in the Colosseum. So, okay, I think you had a lot of ideas about a better world, and which were maybe personal, but also some things we might all think about, like peace of others. So, when I now talk about utopian thinking, you practice it. So you know what it really is, at least in the version you usually do in terms of daydreaming or in terms of imagining the world. This is really a good preparation for the theory of utopian thinking, so that you can realize that it's not only something which is not connected to us. And utopian thinking is a little bit ambivalent and paradox, because on one hand it's something we do all the time. On the other hand, to utilize it as a means and a tool for transformation, we need to do it in a more professional and sustainable way. And I will point out how this can work. Going back to the term utopia, literally means a good place and a place which does not exist. It is a place for dreams, but also for strategically imagining sustainable changes. It is future-oriented, but also connected to the past and present. It is an ambivalent concept. It can lead to sustainable transformations, but also to devastating damage. There's a close connection between utopia and ideology. Utopian thinking can be found in political programs or in works of art, in curricula, or in institutional visions. Utopian thinking is much more widespread, and you can find it in many more places as we usually imagine. British sociologist Ruth Levitas wrote a lot about utopia and utopian thinking as method. And she defined utopia as a multifaceted concept and defined it in 4 different ways. And maybe your ideas also resonate with some of these ideas. First, an utopia can be an expression of a desire for a better way of living. That's what I ask you to imagine, something better. But it can also be an irrelevant fantasy or a nightmare. For instance, National Socialist ideology during the Third Reich in Germany was something like that. Or you can imagine different kinds of ideologies which present a kind of utopian vision, but it's only for a few, and for the others it's more an idea. Then it can be about social practices prefigurating a better society, like the hippie movement, or like other organizations or kibbutz who try to live a different kind of lifestyle to show how that is. Or it can be finally about an outline of an alternative society, like the classless society, or heaven, something like that. These 4 definitions or descriptions of utopia try to capture the concept in its many dimensions. And Levitas also says that utopia is not only a content, but it can also be used as a method. As a method, it can function as criticism. It says what's not so good about what's currently happening. And I think you did that already in your work. You criticized current practices in higher music education. Today you criticize a little bit standards, artistic standards and things like that. And it can also be, utopia and utopian thinking, catalyst for change, because you know where to go. You have a specific vision, and you just don't say, well, I want to change something, because you know, even if it might seem unrealistic. And then, on the negative side, again, utopia can also be a compensation. We dream, we somehow create dreams which help us to go out of reality, because reality is so bad, we need some place to retreat to. In Romanticism, for instance, music was such a tool to just get out of the world into a world of dreams. So utopia and utopian thinking can be used as a method for transforming the current state of society, of institutions, or whatever you want. Next slide, please. And regarding these functions, when utopia is used as a method, it means it is used as a hermeneutic method, hermeneutic in English way. It's about unearthing visions of alternative realities. Which means, for instance, in curricula, in descriptions of institutions, in political programs, we have already many descriptions of how the world could be different. But we need to understand them, we need to take a look at them to see what's already there. Then it can be, utopian thinking can be an exploratory tool. Levitas says for the imaginary reconstitution of society, but it can also be for the imaginary reconstitution of higher music education, or whatever topic you would like to have. And finally, it can be about real utopias. I will talk about that, about real utopias and everyday utopias, because I think it's a valuable concept for your work and something maybe you could think about. One technique to use utopia as a method are the 3 modes of utopian thinking. The archaeological mode, the ontological mode, and the architectural mode. It's These three modes of utopian thinking help, on one side, to find where we have already utopian ideas, and on the other side, based on these utopian ideas, to develop better ideas. The archaeological mode is about uncovering hidden notions of alternative realities, for example in political programs, curricular research or in the arts. The ontological mode further elaborates the ideas developed in the first stage by specifying a better reality. And the architectural mode is about creating different visions and fleshing out the ideas presented before to explain how the proposed concept would look like in reality, including its consequences, prior to returning to the archaeological mode. The three modes of utopian thinking can be applied to any number of fields, including higher education. In your work, you might even have already applied some of these modes of utopian thinking when considering how to transform power relations in higher music education. These modes of utopian thinking in generally offer a more systematic approach and facilitate necessary changes. Like I said already, we have many utopian ideas in various fields, for instance in the feminist movement, in the ecological movement, in many different movements. And we need on one hand, and this is what these different modes of thinking are about, we need through the archaeological mode to understand where these utopian ideas already are in order to utilize them in a different way. But the interesting question would now be, do we know how to think in an utopian way, or do we need to learn it? So I did not explain to you when I said, think about a better world, what you had to do, but you knew it already. And so it might be interesting to take a closer look at that. Research indicates that utopian thinking is not that easy, at least not if we want to utilize it as a means and a tool for transformation. Research at Western Law University of Applied Sciences in Bergen indicates that. So research group there, Wiek and her colleagues, asked music teacher education students about their utopian visions for the music teacher education program. What would they like to see changed? I could ask you now what you would imagine, but you can read this article that was recently published in Visions of Research in Music Education. So they ask students, because they always complain about the bad programs and stuff like that. And what they said was, they would like to have free coffee, they would like to have more instruments and things like that. And only a few students actually said something unusual, like we would like to have composition lessons with Edward Grieg or Utopian thinking. So this indicates that utopian thinking is not that easy, because free coffee, I mean, is really not utopian. You can just have a little bit of money and pay for it. Or more instruments also not. While the thing with composition lessons with Edward Grieg might be tricky to realize. Anyway, there is a clear difference between wishful thinking and utopian thinking. And beneath the things we are not able to realize, even if they sound crazy. And that's something I would like to encourage you in this presentation. Be crazy. Have crazy ideas. Because without these crazy ideas, you will never be able to implement something which works. The history of utopian thinking shows that many different ideas have been imagined first, like women's rights, unemployment benefit, health insurance for everyone and things like that. And at the time when they were imagined, they were completely crazy. But now, we have them as the most normal part of our lives. And the interesting thing about utopian visions, also regarding the classless society or other things, is they are never completely implemented and realized. Only some aspects are realized. But actually, that was enough to change the world or change society. You don't need the whole vision. So, I would like to encourage you to be crazy and to reach beyond the sky. But before that, I would like to talk a little bit how you can learn utopian thinking. Because it's more than wishful thinking and free coffee. Can you please? Yeah, right. So one way would be to study utopias which already exist. Next slide, please. Sorry for that. Yeah. There are lots of publications about utopias and utopian thinking, about feminist utopias. The Utopian Reader is about different kinds of utopian thinking through the centuries. Or Better Worlds is about education and utopia. because education is very much about utopian thinking. We are educating and training and preparing the next generation. And my utopia is actually creative writing of normal people who try to imagine how the world could look different or what they would like to see changed. Next slide, please. So you could study these utopias. You could also practice Levitas' 3 modes of utopian thinking. For instance, take a look at the framework of your schools of music and see if there are any goals, any kind of utopian ideas there. You could develop individual or collective visions. That's something I also would like to talk a little bit more about. What you would really like to see, what your academy stands for, what your vision would be on an individual and on a collective level. And of course, understanding education as utopian, which I think, at least I as a teacher, never had any idea about because it was just about surviving. By the way, I worked 7 years as a high school teacher, so I think I know what I'm talking about. And understanding and experiencing the arts as utopian, because the arts always opened up a different world to which we could go, either to change the world or to retreat to a different kind of world. So, learning utopian thinking means, for instance, using these ideas. It means, above all, releasing the imagination from restrictions. You are allowed to think whatever you want. It's about not being bound to probabilities, but being free to imagine the impossible, to later connect some aspects with what is possible. There are, of course, challenges and problems of utopia and utopian thinking, like I said already, in connection to ideology, but I'm not going into that further because it would be too complicated. But there was always a close connection between utopian thinking and politics. And I would like to talk a little bit about that, because working in higher education is also very much about politics and political actions. There has always been a close connection between utopia and politics, because utopia provides, quote, a critical analysis of socio-political reality as much of its ideal visions. Utopias are often statements of alternative organizations, because you criticize the present by developing new ideas. Utopias help to explain the shortcomings of the current situation and facilitate developing alternatives. Utopian ideas can be found, like I said, in the ecological movement, feminism or socialism. Many groundbreaking ideas have been imagined as utopian ideas first, before they were implemented, like women's rights, universal healthcare, and so on. But like I said, utopian ideas and visions were never completely implemented. You always need to keep that in mind. You can think as big as you want. If it comes down to the realization, only a little bit is being realized. But that little bit usually helps to change a lot. And the 3 modes of utopian thinking can also certainly support doing that in various ways. And it's really about connecting, at least at some point, connecting the utopian ideas we have with reality, and then, like I said, releasing the imagination, be free to think whatever you would like to think. But then in the second step, it's always interesting to try to connect the utopian ideas with reality and see if they can be implemented. And there's one concept I would like to present to you, and this is real utopia. It was developed by Eric Rye in 2010, and it's a concept of utopia which offers a realistic approach, because we always need to consider how realistic our utopia is supposed to be. Of course, the first step, not at all. But later we might connect them to that. And the concept of real utopia offers a realistic approach to utopian thinking, which is informed by the scientific knowledge. Real utopias are accessible way stations. It's about the utopian design of institutions which can inform our practical task of navigating a world of imperfect conditions for social change. Real utopias are focused on changes which can be implemented. Wright refers to participatory city budget, where neighborhoods gather for participatory city budget assembly or worker-owned cooperatives. It's about Can you go? Yeah. Real utopias are about, quote, nurturing clear-sighted understandings of what it would take to create social institutions free of repression, which is part of creating a political will for radical social change to reduce oppression. And it's a vital belief in an utopian ideal may be necessary to motivate people to set off on the journey from the status quo in the first place, even though the likely actual destination may fall short of the utopian ideal. The end is what I said. We just need to go, and then it might just be that we are not able to realize everything. Real utopias are inspired by the tension between dream and reality, between what could be and what is possible. They represent a pragmatic approach which is driven by utopian ideals, uniting people in the transition from the current state to the future. Real utopias are part of the emancipatory social science. Their goal is to generate, quote, scientific knowledge relevant to the collective project challenging various forms of human oppression. Real utopias usually have 3 steps. They start with a diagnosis or critique, and this is often where people stop. But rather, it's also about creating alternatives. And then it's important to have a concept of social transformation. Because even if you have ideas about how the future could be different, you need to think about how to get there from the present to the future. Of course, these 3 steps, and I think also the concept of real utopia can easily be applied to various fields, also to higher music education institutions and power relations. And I think that the concept of utopia is really useful for various kinds of changes. But one thing, and this is what I learned in higher education, like I said, at a very old university, it's also about change management. And changes don't happen by thinking about how you can, what you would like to have. You always need to take change management into account. And change management is very much about communication. Because more than 80% of all attempts at transformation fail. And because of people who resist changes. And that is very interesting when I read a lot about change management, because my personal approach is, because I'm in administration and I see it every day, to connect this kind of utopian thinking with change management. Because otherwise it's very difficult. Of course, at some point, first we need to be free and have the kind of free imagination. But then, of course, you become more realistic, try to share our ideas, try to figure out how to transform things, and then we also need scientific knowledge and information from change management. Like I said, if more than 80% of attempts at transformation fail, then good luck with everything we do, because we need to learn. So utopian thinking can certainly facilitate changes in higher music education. It's about developing visions of how School of Music could be different, following, for instance, Levinas 3 modes of utopian thinking or Wright's concept of real utopia. This could be a starting point for sustainable transformation. But one of the challenges of music education and higher music education is to find a balance between the artistic aesthetic vision and its societal vision. Today it cannot be only about art for its own sake anymore, and about the autonomy of art and the sole focus of music's autonomy. We have a responsibility for a society. In international music education, however, there has been a tendency to exaggerate the societal mission of music education and using it marginalize the aesthetic and artistic dimensions, since social change has been proclaimed to be the main goal of music education. It might be time to find a more balanced concept, reuniting both dimensions. And this is what I suggest in my book, Rethinking Music Education and Social Change. Because in international music education, we only have the first thing, and not even that, because it's called Music Education for Social Change. And I think we have to be very careful. That's why I call it politically and socially responsive music education. Speaking from a German perspective, speaking with the experience of the Third Reich and the misuse of music education. And music educators who supported Hitler. Because they had the same goal. They wanted to have a new society. They wanted to change the society. They wanted to have a new human being. And there are, at many times, these incidences directions where the goals we have as music educators and politics might be the same. And then we are in danger, of falling for ideology. So I thought it's better to have a responsive music education, politically and socially responsive music education, and the aesthetic music education. I write it in a different way. Even in German, we would have an AE. But in international music education, aesthetic music education has been a contested concept for many years. And so I try to be different. It's our German concept of musikalisch-ästhetische Bildung, which I tried to put a little bit in here. But I think it's important, and also for higher music education institutions, to have in mind that we need a balance between these two dimensions of music and music education. And it might also be related to power relations, because whenever we are in an artistic, aesthetic realm of music, it might just be that, there are different hierarchies, we cannot question. Because someone just knows how to play, or someone, I don't know, is just the king of a certain instrument. So it might be important to balance that. And we need both. And when we're thinking power relations in higher music education, we need to take this into account. Often we call it the third mission, but whatever it is, our responsibility to society, but also our responsibility to music as art, and also music education as related to the aesthetic dimensions of music. In view of the current crisis worldwide and the need to rethink the mission of culture and cultural institutions, utopian thinking can play an important role in rebalancing and refining the mission of music and also power relations in higher music education. Now, a brief example. Could you go to the next one? Try to speak faster. When I wrote that down, I had no idea how you work. So a little bit of what I say now is already happening, which is great, because then I don't have to remind you. It's always a little bit strange to be up here and to tell you what to do. The power of collective imagination says basically that I think that groups of people who practice utopian thinking can be very successful. So there might be at respective universities of music, Musikhochschulen, academies of music, certain people who just start thinking in an utopian way, who just develop utopias. Like I said, at the first stage is maybe not being restricted by any kind of reality, by anything which could be implemented, but just having the freedom to think about what could be possible. The different modes of thinking by Levitas could be included, to take a look at the regulations, the laws, the rules, the framework of schools of music, to better understand what the specific laws and as points of references are. It could also be about practicing in these groups, practicing utopian thinking, or learning utopian thinking, like I told before, taking a look at what utopian visions are, especially in the political realm, in politics, to learn more about it. I cannot go into detail, you need to look at my book, for that, about the impact of utopian visions on political developments, because it has really been a huge impact. And so you can really see that whenever you try to develop utopian visions, and there's something to aim for, transformational processes are much better than when you just think we have to change something or what's going on is not good. So you really could do that. And you do that already here, but maybe at your respective universities, academies, whatever, it might not be so usual to have a group of, like was suggested, of different people, from really staff to professors and other people, maybe also people from the outside, just to think about how to create better places, and also without any kind of restrictions. It doesn't matter at the first stages of utopian thinking, if it's possible. Reality will do it anyway, certain things will not be possible to realize. What I also wanted to introduce related to that is the idea of everyday utopia. Everyday utopia means that you try to live a certain utopian idea for a specific amount of time. In Germany, I think it might be all over Europe, we have this kind of motto, play me on euros, where you find pianos all over the city. And everyone can just go to piano and play there. And that actually is an everyday utopia, because it's about having access to an instrument. And it's put into place maybe for 6 weeks. And there are many different ideas of everyday utopia. For instance, a group such as this kind of think tank at university or Academy of Music could develop certain ideas, and they could be implemented for a certain amount of time. So there could be experiments, just trying out things. If they fail, they fail, doesn't matter. Just to try with this notion of everyday utopia to change how reality is in a very restricted amount of time. There's a book by British sociologist Cooper about everyday utopias and how successful they have actually been in terms of political and social transformations. And I think it's a good idea, and also real utopias, of course, to a certain degree diminish the idea of utopia. But like I said, no restrictions. Release the imagination at the beginning, and then later you can come down to that. And always keep change management in mind. Utopian thinking can play a significant role in sustainable transforming power relations in higher education. It facilitates developing shared vision of an alternative future. Sustainable changes in higher education are a complex matter, since, quote, it takes courage and ingenuity to make the compromises needed to survive, let alone improve the current world. In view of current worldwide changes and challenges, positive as well as realistic visions are much needed. Utopian thinking can offer such perspectives and can certainly be, next slide please, it can certainly be an antidote to the learned helplessness of the present day. Thank you very much for your attention.